All right. Welcome everybody to Get Hired in Tech. Thanks for spending your Monday morning with us. Today we have Alex from Adlucent here to talk a little bit about their hiring process, what he looks for, a little bit about what he does. He's been in the industry for quite a while, and so I called him up and sent him an email, or I think it was a letter that we got, and said, hey, would you help us learn a little bit more about what you do and what you look for? And so we have the pleasure of hearing him. And then just a few announcements about Get Hired in Tech as a whole. The healthcare meetup has been going strong. We just had our second one a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And we had double our numbers, so that's growing. That is really exciting, that's fun. And then tomorrow, we can spread the word. We have our first Get Hired, or not Get Hired, but Get Coffee in North Portland. So what's cool about that is that one of the other organizers, he puts those on. It used to be called Van Coffee here in Vancouver, and we used to hold it when it first originated upstairs of this building. And so that now is held at Presso Coffee. And we have one here, or 2 in Vancouver a month and 2 in Portland per month. So that is going to start going. So anyone that may be coming from Portland or knows anyone in tech in Portland and would like a sit down kind of intimate conversation about tech, we do talk a little bit about hiring and what's available and what people are seeing, but typically we have conversations that we go into. So there's some introductions, talk about a subject, and we move on from there. And then some of the other things, just unofficially, we haven't moved quite yet, but we are looking at going into a nonprofit status for this group. So that's something that's going to be happening. We're working out details and don't have an exact time frame, but it is pretty cool that we are going to be going into a nonprofit. The group has been around since November 2017, so not very long in the big scheme of things. We're coming up in November as our 2-year mark. And we're pushing, I don't know, I didn't even look, but every day we're getting new members. And so we should be, by the end of the year, I wouldn't doubt if we're pushing 1,000 members. So we are one of the fastest growing meetup groups in the entire country. And so that's really exciting. And not only by one of the organizers that we have, Danny over here, did a lot of statistical research on the group and as a whole, and just putting some of these things out. He went and studied what are the trends, what are we looking at, what is our actual engagement with Get Hired in Tech, who are we actually serving, how much help are we actually doing. What's cool about this group is that at the time, I think there was around 800 members or so. Meetup.com goes by active numbers and they have a stat in it. Well, we have between 180 and 200 active members. So yes, the total numbers of members are great, but what you want to see in a group like this is how many people are active, how many people are we actually delivering content to, what does that look like? I can tell you by the YouTube site, our numbers sometimes are a little bit smaller on in our groups, and that it just varies, right? So sometimes a bunch of people will sign up, sometimes they'll come, sometimes they won't. But according to our YouTube site, since we've been doing the videos, we have, I think I average almost 300 hours a month on total hours watched. So our group's getting out there. I push that nationwide. So the content that we're delivering is impacting people. 300 hours, and I don't know a whole ton about social media, YouTube, anything like that, but from what my 13-year-old tells me, 300 hours is a lot of hours watched on YouTube. So excited about that, and that goes back for anyone that is new that hasn't been on that site. It's TC Anchor Consulting on YouTube. So it's TC Anchor Consulting. And you can go back to, we have, I don't know, I think there's 10, 12 videos, and we upload them. Every couple weeks, we'll put the speakers on, depending on how quickly that I can get them uploaded. Steven, who has been a member since the beginning, films all these, and depending on how he gets the information, so it's as soon as I can get my booty in gear and get them uploaded is when we get them. But we have quite a few videos of some of the guest speakers we've had before. With that said, I don't think there's any other major announcements. We are looking right now, November 20th. Mark your calendars for Meet the Meetups. That's here. So we are working on that. We're pushing We're up to 20 groups right now, so if you have meetups that you'd like to learn about but you haven't been able to go see, feel free to let myself or Danny know. We're reaching out to different meetup groups in the area. It can be Portland, anyone, and then what we do is we bring those meetups in a career fair type setting where you can basically interview the meetups. Last year we had over 200 people come into the space. Boomerang's open for beer, wine, food. So it's a really cool event. We'll have the entire space going for that and some guest speakers that will be in there. So with that said, I'm going to stop talking and let Alex get to his presentation. So thank you, Alex, and show's yours.
All right, thanks. All right, well, good morning. My name's Alex Harmon, and happy to be here and to hopefully provide some information and support for those interested in getting into tech. And the area that I'm focusing on for today is around digital advertising. Just a quick show of hands, are folks share how familiar you are with advertising in general and digital? Okay. All right. So if you want to hit the next one, I actually met Max, I'll say almost a year ago, somewhere around there, and through a mutual connection, and I was just sharing with him that I am now in the collab space right across the street. I'm working remotely for a company based in Austin, Texas. The company's called Adlucent. It's a digital advertising agency. We've been doing this for over 15 years. I've been in digital marketing for about 20, going back to about 2001 in-house, and have been with the agency for a little more than 12 years now. And he shared some things here, about the local community, resources, because I wasn't as familiar, and we were looking to expand potentially into a satellite office. So it was good meeting him and getting that connection, and when he shared the opportunity to speak here, I look forward to it, giving something back. And so I've been involved in this space through a variety of roles within our organization, primarily account management. Search engine marketing is our bread and butter, so I'm most familiar with that, but we also offer social advertising, Amazon, programmatic capabilities. So really a full service advertising agency. And we were acquired a couple of years ago by a really large organization that does more offline advertising, in-store demos, that sort of thing. But they also have a pretty big marketing division with complementary agencies. So traditional brand advertising, customer journey, digital analytics, a variety of other services. So we really bring a lot together, and it's given me exposure to some other fields and touch points that we wouldn't normally address with our agency. But where I think I can be beneficial here with this group is I've also been involved at our organization on the hiring side. So, fielding hires for entry-level positions within account management, or even experienced folks who can come in and plug and play. We primarily look for account management roles within our client services department. We have a variety of other roles, but those are the ones that I've been most familiar with hiring for, whether it's screening resumes, doing interviews, phone screens, and then doing roundtable, where we will determine from the group of candidates who are the ones who are going to make it and who are the ones who are going to be a good fit for us, as well as refining our process so that we can get better outcomes. And what that means is how do we match the right type of candidates to what we're looking for, and make sure that if and when we do hire them, they stay on for a good period of time, at least 2 years is kind of our break-even point, and make sure that they have a good experience and are productive for the organization. So we always want to make sure it's a win-win for both sides. So with that having been said, go ahead and move on. So first, why digital advertising? It's maybe a little bit more technical, or it's becoming more technical than I think people might realize. So there isn't as much from a programming standpoint. That's what I think of when I think technical. Okay, am I a programmer? Do I develop software? That sort of thing. But there are more and more applications now that are needed, and a little bit more of a tech mindset to be successful in digital advertising. And so what I thought I'd share here is like, why would you get into this field if you're not in this in the first place, but you're looking to get into it, or you're not sure if it's where you want to stay? The first thing I'd say is this is where more and more dollars are going. So companies are investing more into digital and away from traditional channels such as television, radio, newspaper, print, etc. So it's always a good place to be where the dollars are going, because that's what's sustaining, certain departments, certain channels, etc. And I'll add a stat on that in just a second. Second, and I hear this from people who apply all the time, is that this is an area that's constantly changing. So there are new entrants into the space, even for the dominant players like the Googles, and now Facebook, although they're more recent. Their products and services constantly evolve, and I think you get a sense of that as a consumer, because you see, well, the search engine results page looks a little different, or you see ads where you maybe didn't see them before, or even on your mobile device, different experiences within stores, etc. So that plus how consumers are changing their habits, from a shopping standpoint, that's the background we have is in retail. Things are changing. People are on their mobile devices doing research, going in stores, doing some research, switching between devices. So there's a lot at play, and so how you get in front of the consumer and give them that good story, share value, and make sure that, at least for retail, they purchase, that's constantly shifting, and how you measure that, how you gauge success is very different. And so, from the standpoint of, are you doing the same thing over and over every day? There are elements that are similar, but year in, year out, there are new challenges that the industry faces, which I find appealing and refreshing, and a lot of the folks that we hire, that's what keeps them motivated and enjoy this kind of work. It is, tech from the standpoint of different tools and platforms that I was alluding to earlier. So yes, there's still spreadsheets and the usual Microsoft Office, Google Suite products, but there are different applications that we're starting to use now as tools to help us accomplish the things that we're trying to do. So there are more plugins, even within the platforms going in and managing some of these programs. They're just new bells and whistles. So what you might see as a consumer is changing on the other end as the person tweaking the knobs responsible for programs. There are a lot of things that are changing too, and so you've got to stay up with it. There are more and more certifications now that are required to kind of show that you're up to speed on these things, and I'll get into that as well. And then finally, I think this, digital advertising gives you kind of a way to step into additional roles that you might not have thought of up front. So while I speak to account management and being responsible for budgets and having certain outcomes for sales or leads, what have you, once you get that base experience, I oftentimes see people branch off into other areas, whether it's product management or in strategy, training, sales. So there's a variety of ways that you can use it as a springboard to other areas that maybe are more in touch with what you really enjoy doing, or you can stay in digital advertising and go deep, and I'll show you a little bit more about that too. So here's a quick stat on essentially where are dollars going when it comes to advertising these days. So the dark blue shows where things are going to be in 2020, just a few years from now. Light blue is where things are now, and you can see across the different media channels here, and you can see by far internet and online is the most dominant, and it's the only one really growing significantly over the next few years, slated to grow 25%, while the others are flat or shrinking. So again, where do you want to be? You probably want to be in the area where that's going to be affected most through advertising budgets. So I always like sharing this so people get a sense of, well, okay, things are moving that direction. How big is it? It's pretty significant here. And then, so within digital advertising, I've listed here kind of the main channels for those that maybe aren't as familiar. When an organization is running its advertising, they're usually set up to run across all of these. And again, I'll maybe use retail as an example. So your company is selling widgets, selling clothes, what have you. you have an opportunity to do your traditional advertising, but more and more, like I said, dollars are going into these channels. And so what these mean are search engine marketing. These are paid ads on the search engine. So you type something into Google, you'll likely see little text boxes or product image ads. Those are being paid for. So when someone clicks, someone is getting charged on the back end. And they're bidding for certain placement. So the more you bid, it's an auction system. The higher you will show up, the more likely you will be seen. When someone clicks, that's when you get charged. You'll go to a landing page or a website. Ultimately, you want them to convert whatever that may look like. So this is, search engine marketing is what gets the lion's share of digital advertising dollars. It's the one that has the most accountability, I would say. It's the easiest probably to measure across them. And it's, at this point, pretty well established. Underneath that is probably what most people out on the street, lay people would think, oh, I'm optimizing my website, I'm going to show up on Google. That's search engine optimization. So that is free. It's all about how you optimize your website so that Google and other engines can crawl it, take a look at the content that's there and determine, this page is relevant for someone's search. And that's what you'll see underneath ads. Then there's social. So this is now becoming fastest growing segment. Facebook entered the paid social or the paid advertising environment, I want to say 5-6 years ago. Initially, it was about getting likes and getting views, and it was like, okay, is this really effective from a business standpoint? Is it driving the outcomes that I'm looking for? They've evolved and matured, and I'd say they have offered a lot more new advertising formats and tools to become just as accountable as search engine marketing. It's still upper funnel, so more about awareness, that initial discovery of a product or service, not so much the last touch point that you're going to go to make a purchase, but it's a fantastic way to get in front of folks. I think the latest stat is Facebook across Instagram and the properties that they have, they control about 20% of everyone's mobile time. And so where are people now? They're not sitting in front of their TV as much. They're not, reading papers. They're using their mobile device. So if you can get 1 out of every 5 seconds in front of someone, that's why social, and Facebook in particular, is a really powerful tool. Display and programmatic, what that means is essentially, think of banner ads, or, you're on New York Times, ESPN, CNN, and you see these ads throughout the publisher page. Those are essentially display ads. So you're browsing content, you might see an ad there. Ideally, you're seeing ads, and you're probably recognizing this over the last few years, that they're becoming a little bit more relevant than they used to. Before, it could be maybe a truck advertisement. It's like, okay, great. It's kind of like watching TV. It's not really tailored to you. But with the improvement in technology in a variety of ways to understand what resonates for you, how to drive relevant messaging, ideally you should be seeing that as a consumer, more and more ads that are familiar to you, things that you've looked at in the past through your own search behavior, or just things that are appealing to you based on your personal interests. A lot of dollars go here. Because again, it's kind of upper funnel, but it also is a new mechanism to get people, after they've done some search browsing, they've exhibited some behavior. It's a way to remind them about something. Hey, you forgot something in your shopping cart. Or, hey, you were browsing, let me just remind you about something, or tell you a different message slightly. Email, this one's been around for a long time, probably the most commoditized of these channels. There's a lot that still goes in this, so open rates, getting people to pay attention, it's getting tougher and tougher. So there's still people that are responsible for driving good returns on email marketing. So that involves creative, catchy messaging, and ultimately, getting people to perform that outcome. This is more of a retention tool at this point, I would say. So you've signed up for a newsletter, you've signed up for a product, you have a login. It's a good way for companies to message back to you because they know they have your information so long as you're keeping it current, or they're keeping it current. But it's not as powerful as it used to be, 7-10 years ago. Amazon and Marketplace are very similar, but Amazon is the 800-pound gorilla, dominating retail, dominating a lot of channels. It's developing its own advertising ecosystem, just like Google and Facebook. It's really jumped into this over the last 2 years, but I see this as getting, accelerating in terms of growth. More and more companies are getting into Amazon, if not just to sell, but then to get in front of consumers. I think it's roughly 50% of all product searches now start on Amazon. So folks are going to Amazon first, then doing their shopping, searching for things. They're not going to Google or the other engines as much as they used to. So that's where they're competing with one another. How do they get in front of eyeballs? And then lastly, affiliates. So there are websites out there who can serve as subject matter experts or that have content. They're not really looking to be a huge publisher, but they can provide links to those companies and drive some relevant traffic. And so if somebody clicks from there and they're part of an affiliate network, and then someone does end up purchasing, they get credit because they essentially referred that traffic. And so they have relationships with those other companies, usually on a percentage, on a rev share model. They'll get a percentage of whatever was purchased. Smaller, again, not really driving awareness, et cetera, but these are usually the big ones that you'll see. And as I mentioned, once you get familiar with these, you can stay deep and do this. I mean, I've been doing search engine marketing for 10 plus years. Happy to stay in that lane. Or you can branch out, because once you kind of get familiar with the metrics, the KPIs, and how these all start to play with one another, then you might say, oh, you know what, I can apply some of my learning. Let me see what I can do over with email, or let me take a stab at this. You're already familiar with a lot of the jargon, a lot of the acronyms and the ways of measuring it. But it's fun to have that breadth of experience. But then these can also pivot, like I said earlier, to other areas. So maybe you really like playing with the numbers. You don't really want to be accountable to clients or to marketing teams. You just want to provide the insights and the numbers. So maybe you want to go into analytics, and there's a fresh set of tools there, and you can go deep there. Or maybe you want to take what you've learned here and improve how you guys go to market for the company that you're at. You want to freshen up your sales decks. You want to help with business development. More and more, we see now that, yes, people are looking for great service providers here, but they want someone who can package all of these together and give them a sound strategy. How do you go into next year, over the next 3 years? What's going to be changing? What do you need to be aware of? What does the business need to do fundamentally to take advantage of these channels, or to pivot and be more successful with a digital-first advertising strategy? So now we're seeing more and more consultancies show up, and more demand for thought leadership and strategy, and that's where actually we're doing more investment in as well. You can also dabble in creative. You could get into training. You could train others on how to do this properly. I mean, it is a full-time job keeping up with this. We've actually hired people into training positions where they started as account managers, and because there's so much changing and it's hard to teach people and scale it effectively if you're doing it one by one. Hey, come over to my computer, I'm going to show you something. That's really tough to do. And you've got to stay on top of a lot of things, and you've got to, there's its own science and expertise around delivering training that's going to work for people. Some people absorb information better visually. They need to do exercises. Some people need to hear it a few times. So just getting the training aspect for coworkers or to grow an organization is pretty important. So what do, in our experience as an agency, what does Adlucent look like? We're over 130 people. When I started, we were less than 10. We have, I would say, a pretty good model for bringing in entry-level groups. What we do is we hire folks on what we call our boot camp. So we get classes of 3 to 6 people at one time, entry-level. They'll go through a training program, usually about 4 weeks to 6 weeks, and that gives them the foundational skills to then go get assigned a team, start working with folks, and they've got enough information to then begin working on those initial assignments and tasks, and then from there they get more experience and start doing things more independently. But they need that foundation. So when we think of, okay, who's going to succeed in that environment, at least for entry level, but this also applies to experience, we look for folks who've got sharp attention to detail. And I think that's probably universal in just about any industry, but it's really critical here because you're going to be in front of numbers, you're going to be working with spreadsheets. It's important that you know how to do calculations in a sound way where no one is questioning the answers that you're providing. And when you're giving conclusions, you're talking about budgets that are in tens of thousands to millions of dollars. No one wants to be second guessing, hey, did you do your math right? Double check your work. So that's extremely critical. But then it also applies to communication skills. Oftentimes we will communicate via email, and so you need to be able to convey your points clearly, succinctly, and message what needs to be said, whether it's in an email, whether it's in a message back answering something for a client, or for a colleague, putting together a presentation. No one likes sloppy work, but with digital advertising, there's so much going on, communication between teams, between clients, and all the information that you're getting. If you're not paying attention, it's garbage in, garbage out, so that's critical. Second thing, and I touched on it earlier, there is more information in front of companies, analysts, advertisers than ever before. There's too much information right now for human beings to be able to sift through effectively. And so that's why you might hear terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, because there's more and more information coming at us because we're collecting more information about consumers. There's different touch points. Then how do you piece it together? That's really challenging. So we work quite a bit with Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets. You've got to be comfortable sifting through large amounts of information, but then pulling it together ultimately to extract insights. What is the data telling you? What story is in that? What decision are you going to make based off that information? So people that are comfortable with that and don't get paralyzed by all the data, know how to manipulate it using formulas, etc., and just pulling out what is essential are going to be really successful. And then I would imagine this is, like with most companies, but in our line of work, because there are so many different things going on, different projects, different deadlines, it's really important for folks to be able to understand the difference between what's important versus what's urgent. And I always, we like to have people do a little 2x2 grid. I'm sure some of you are familiar. You got your things that are urgent and important, probably going to hit that first. But then you've got things that are not important and not urgent. Delegate, save it for next week, someone else can do that. And it's that in between of things that are important, or things that are really urgent, that trade-off, but you've got to be able to balance what you're going to do that day. And if you can't get something done, or there's a monumental task, you've got to be able to vocalize that and tell people, hey, what's the trade-off here? In advertising, there's so many little levers that you could pull that will have an impact on how much you're going to spend that day, or how successful you're going to be that day, that week, or for that project, that if you're not making those right trade-offs, you're going to have bad outcomes. And a lot of that could be alleviated up front, but it's an interesting thing that some people, we find that they're not willing to delegate, they're not willing to ask for help, they're not willing to say, hey, I don't know how I might be able to navigate this complex scenario. Can someone, work with me? How do we break this down? And oftentimes that leads to bad outcomes. So it's an interesting to pull out. It's a soft skill, but you want people who are comfortable being able to do that. And then certainly, no one's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We've all been there. But being willing to hear that constructive criticism, and not shut down, but then learn from it, as well as being able to give that feedback back to a superior or to a colleague, is critical. That's one of the things that we explore early on in our interviews, is how open people are to feedback. Because if they're not, there's only so far you're going to be able to go. Learning all of this, not making mistakes, we think that's critical. And then the thing that we try to get to, and this is really hard, but in this industry, because things are changing all the time, and what works today may not work tomorrow, and we challenge people to come up with better ideas. We want folks who have that natural, innate curiosity. Like, why do we do it this way? Or you say, oh, these are the 10 steps we follow. Well, why isn't there an 11th? Or how'd you come up with this in the first place? So we want people to ask questions. And oftentimes, like when I referenced we hire in boot camps, we we look out for the folks who are staying quiet, who, seem like, oh, no, I've got it, I understand, no questions here. That starts to raise some flags with us. Now, sure, there are going to be a few who are just rock stars, this stuff in and out, you're a genius, etc. But the folks who aren't willing to raise their hand, it starts to worry us a little bit, because that's going to show up later in teamwork, and having a little bit of that imposter syndrome where you look at everybody else, boy, everyone else seems really smart, they seem to know what they're doing, I don't. Let me figure it out, or else I'm going to look foolish, or I'm not going to look as strong as these other candidates. We want to get rid of that. Certainly you need an atmosphere where teamwork and collaboration support is present, otherwise people aren't going to be willing and trusting to say that. That's really critical. So if you are looking to apply and break into the space and you don't have experience, or you have very little, what are some pointers from a resume standpoint and cover letter? And I will say, when we look at all of the inputs into a hiring decision, we give resumes like the smallest amount. We know people can't fluff them. We know it's just a snapshot in time. People are so much more than just what they're putting on 1 or 2 sheets of paper. So it's just an initial way for us to catch some things, and for us to sift through all the applicants and find out the ones that maybe have those characteristics that we're looking for. So I think it's really important, and what I found, when I'm scanning through resumes is, if you don't have that much experience, show that you've got some passion for this industry. Like, tell us about a time that maybe you did have to do some number crunching, or you were responsible for something and you had to meet a deadline, because those are the things we're going to be looking for you to do here. Yes, maybe you don't have 10 years of doing this, and you can tell us the best way that you found how to do it when you're working with X, Y, and Z type client. But you got to be able to demonstrate how you would apply yourself in this kind of environment. So, and if you don't have that, I put here, put yourself in the shoes of the customer. As a customer, I've noticed that I've started to see these kinds of ads, or, oh, I know that Google is now changing this, or, it's interesting, when I walk into a store, I see more of these beacons and they tell me, I can redeem this back on, my computer. I wonder why they do that. Or I notice that this is really good experience as a consumer. This is why I go back to this company. I think they've really got it right. Whereas I don't have as good of an experience here. How would you address that? So you have ways to engage in a conversation without having, that experience up front. And then, when you're engaging with someone or you're applying, I think in a cover letter, it's really helpful to share, how do you envision yourself at this company? How do you see yourself plugging in? What are you going to bring to the table? So paint that picture for someone, so when they read that cover letter, it's not just, well, you're looking for this and I can give you this. Tell a little bit of a story so that they can kind of see, oh, this person's taken the time to read up on us, and they can already imagine themselves being successful in this role. That is a lot more engaging and powerful than just kind of the black and white, here's the skill you're looking for, this is why I think I'll be good, at this particular role. Again, do your best to show examples where you've had impact. Quantify as much as you can. So it's one thing to say, well, I've done X. Okay, don't stop there. I hate that the most about resumes. I do this, I coordinate this, or I run reports. Great. What for? What kind of impact did you have? Did you meet deadlines? Were you the one responsible for getting this on time? Demonstrate those things that you can be counted on and trusted on, and that you have an impact in the organization. And then finally, I put a lot of stock into this last one. So if you're breaking into something, that's the hardest thing, is getting your foot in the door. You just need that first opportunity. But there are more and more opportunities now to show that you're passionate about something and that you have the skill set by getting certified. I'll share at the end of the presentation where you can do this. But show that you have taken the time because you care and that you're interested, that you've gone out and gotten your certification around how to run Google Ads, or that, I'll explain a little bit further, but that you demonstrate some level of subject matter expertise around these channels, because there are tools out there that allow you to do that for free. And so getting a degree, getting a workshop, etc. Some are a lot more time intensive. Certainly, getting a degree with a business background, advertising background is one thing, but there are little things you can do to break in, especially if you've been in a career for so long, and you're like, okay, I need to make a pivot. I don't have the time to go get another degree. What can I do right now that demonstrates that I have the capabilities? These are some ways to do that. And then for folks that do have experience, always, as much as you can, show where you have run those different channels or where you have demonstrated excellence in those other areas and quantify it. I can't stand it when folks say, oh, I ran search engine marketing. I was responsible for advertising. Tell me more. Did you double the sales while you were in charge? Did you take it from a brand new program to something really mature? And then share those acronyms, share the language. I boosted click-through rates, 50% through better creative, or I improved our landing pages and I saw a 25% conversion rate increase and that led to X more sales. Or by eliminating waste, I saved 50% of our budget and we reallocated it over to this channel. So again, I think those are really critical, and if you don't have those, it sparks some doubt in my mind that you really even knew what you were trying to do. And not to be unfair to candidates, because we'll always say, okay, maybe you're coming from a previous environment where that wasn't as scrutinized, or you didn't have the right mentoring and training. But it's going to come up if you get an interview. So I always think it's really important that you're able to defend and demonstrate how strong of a player you were when you were responsible. Same thing, show passion, show why you'd be a great fit for the organization. What are you going to bring to the table? It's one thing to say, oh, this is what I'm going to get for the company that I'm looking to get hired for. I love your agency. You guys win all these awards. I hear about the culture. It's so great. Fantastic. We want to make sure it's a win for both sides. What are you going to give to the organization? We don't want folks who are going to be pulling resources, pulling everything out of the organization, but what are you going to give back? I've got an infectious team spirit, or I'm always the one bringing new ideas, or I'm always willing to help out other departments, or I'm the one willing to, stay late to make sure something gets done. It's like, share what you bring to the table as well. And then this last one, it's one thing to say you've got the experience, or, oh, I've done this, and this seems like a great, next fit, or this seems like a role with more responsibilities. Take time to reflect on the information and the experiences you've had, and what have you learned from it? Like, how has that changed you? When I first started this, I did it this way, and I learned over time, this is a better way to do things. Or, boy, I had this terrible experience, complete flop, but here's what I learned from it, here's what I'm not going to do again. Or here are things that I've changed in how I approach my day, my time management, etc. So reflect on that. I think those are, and I'll get to this in a sec, but I think those are ways that you can demonstrate thoughtfulness and not just, well, I'm going to go do the same thing and you tell me the recipe and I'm just going to follow it without asking questions. So when we hire, we get the initial screens, we do a logic quiz. So we're looking for folks who are adept at pattern recognition, because when you're going through data, you want to find little patterns and then say, this is what's working or not working, let me change something. So those are kind of the bare bones. But then once you do get into the next step of our recruiting process, and some will argue, okay, it's a little too long, but we think it's time well spent to weed out the right, or to get the right candidates. We do think it's important that when you come in for an interview, you know the organization. So I can't stress this enough. This is kind of a no-brainer, but do your research. Who's on the leadership team? Who are the executives at a company? What have they been up to? You can probably glean that from press releases, their blog. Take a look at their website. What are their products? What are their services? How do they talk about them? How long have they been in the business? What are some of their big clients that they might showcase? Get to understand that so that you have some talking points. And then we also do a take-home assignment. So pretty much every position, there's some kind of assignment we give you, because The reason why we put such little stock in resumes is because, we want to see what you're capable of. We want to see in action. So we try to give folks an assignment that will reflect what they're going to be responsible for on a day-to-day basis. And so for account managers, we give them a series of questions that relate to things that they're going to experience. And it's okay. I mean, if they don't know that, so you might think, oh, entry level, how am I going to know these questions? Well, a lot of that information is online. Where you go get certified, they've got all the workshops, they've got all the training tutorials. So when you get that, take it seriously, because we found, and this came from our founder, he thought it was a really good gauge of work ethic. So we give people an assignment, they've got it on Friday, they give it back to us over the weekend, we say it's due Monday morning. You can tell pretty quickly the people that took it seriously, that had the attention to detail where it wasn't sloppy, riddled with grammar and spelling mistakes, lengthy, thoughtful responses versus the ones that weren't. And those were the ones where, okay, you can weed those out. But we don't want to we want to eliminate as much bias in our hiring, so we have objective scoring. So there are answers that have questions that have a very specific answer, and it isn't, dependent on me grading it versus Susie Money grading it. You're going to get scored effectively and consistently, no matter who is grading it. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the knowledge, or you went out and researched it. And we know that all the information is out there, so it's just a matter of hustle and putting two and two together, and then you should be successful. The other thing to consider when we interview, we again try to make it objective, so we will have structured interviews. So you may interview with 2, 3, 4 different people or a couple of groups. They're going to ask you the same questions or very similar questions. And so we're all going to reflect back and say, okay, how'd you score number 2? Oh, I scored this one really weak and poor. Oh, you know what? I did the same thing because they didn't highlight X, Y, and Z. That's one of the things that we've changed over time, is rather than just one person doing the screening, or hey, today I feel like I'm going to ask questions about your background, or tomorrow I'm going to ask a little bit more about a project that you did. We standardized our questions, and that was easier to get more consistent outcomes. So we try to do that to make sure we're not biased, or someone has a bad morning and they're in a bad mood, or they're feeling, oh, I really connected with this person. They were a lot of fun and so charismatic, and they're getting brownie points for that. We try to eliminate that so that we're getting the right people, not having that result tweaked based on some kind of bias. The last thing too here is, when you're engaging with folks, it's one thing to answer the questions, tell me about X or walk me through this. But it's really important, I think, back to storytelling, that you're mindful enough to be able to explain, here's where I was coming from, and I like giving this star example. And I didn't know about it until a few years ago. I was like, oh, that's really smart. That's why I'm getting kind of frustrated with certain interviews, because you only give me a little bit and you need prompting. Go in, explain what was the story, or what was the situation, what was the environment you were facing, what were you responsible for doing? So what was the task that you had in front of you? What did you specifically do? Maybe you're part of a team, well, we did this, or this is what we all did. No, stay away from that. What was your individual contribution towards that situation and task? And then ultimately, here's the result that I got. When I did X, Y, and Z, I noticed that I did improve performance by 10%, or we cut our project time by 1/3. And then the thing that I added, and I thought, oh, this is really good, saw it later, is don't stop there. Okay, that's great, you got the result. But what'd you learn from it? That was a really stressful situation. I realized that I needed to pull in a couple of team members earlier because I didn't realize this back-end piece was going to take so long. Or I explained to my boss, this is what I was thinking. They got a preview, they bought into my plan. It made it much easier to get the support that I needed, regardless of the outcome. So I think when folks walk through that, in interviews, it sets them up to be able to give more thoughtful, coherent answers. And I think ultimately that's what people want. That's what we want. We want to hear that you have a logical decision-making process, and it's not so scattershot. So, having said that, you know, what are some things that are going on in the industry that I think you should be aware of? So, yes, you know, budgets are growing and it's a pretty cool space, lots of change. You get to work with big companies like Google and Microsoft and Facebook. There are a lot of other things that I think are happening in the space that are worth noting. More and more companies are embracing digital, becoming digital first. And so some that kind of stood out to me, again, through our organization, we do a lot of work with grocery stores. And you'll see more of an emphasis in buy online or you know, curbside pickup, more apps. And so all these, what I would consider, I don't know, these are kind of antiquated, old, you know, grocery store chains. What are they doing with digital? And you still have to go into the store. You know, they're thinking about that too, and how to make that experience a little bit better, leveraging technology. So, you know, that's kind of interesting. Or companies that have traditionally sent out catalogs, you know, they're starting to phase those out, and they're doing, they're reaching people now through those digital advertising channels I was mentioning before. Catalogs still have their place, and they're good reminders, but there are, you know, other tools out there that make them more cost-effective and more productive. And then I call them challenger brands. You may hear that term, but they're essentially these like these digital-first brands where you wouldn't hear about them unless you saw them on social media. That's where they're putting their dollars. That's how they're getting their word out. They're challengers because they're willing to challenge the established and incumbent players. You think of Dollar Shave Club or Harry's, well, Gillette, razor blades, yeah, been there, done that. Who's going to come in and, you know, shake things up? Well, they figured out a better way to do it. Or new shoe and apparel brands, health and beauty. There are more and more brands out there that are embracing social media as a way to get in front of folks and tell their message in a thoughtful way through creative storytelling. They're having a lot of success in that, and that's actually a group that we're trying to get in front of more and more. They're fantastic fits for digital advertising. And as I mentioned, it is getting more and more techy, if you will. So it's one thing to be able to write a thoughtful ad or come up with that killer, idea, just doing it, or, work for Wieden and Kennedy. There's those agencies. But we find that folks need to bring a little bit of that creativity. You've got to bring some of that analytical thinking, and you've got to be comfortable with these different platforms, how they work, how to run reports. It's okay to know a little bit of coding or HTML, et cetera, to better leverage these tools. But we're seeing that start to evolve, and I wish I had remembered it properly, but there was a quote saying essentially that marketers these days need to be technical marketers. You've got to have some of that background as well. And you're seeing the information technology group starting to talk with marketing a lot more, because you need more of these platforms to run your business properly. They've got to speak to each other. You got to know what's in there. You've got to be able to pull the right information properly to make good decisions. And some other areas that are coming up, I talked about strategy earlier, but you think about it as a consumer. I looked at something on my phone, but I bought on my computer. If I'm doing advertising and I never talked to you on the computer, how do I know that that was you? I think that's probably the biggest challenge right now, or one of the biggest challenges facing companies right now, is how you measure everything when people have so many different touch points. People all together know what worked and got in front of someone was effective advertising. And some things for the worse, automation's good. It takes out a lot of the, kind of boring grunt work, but it's also eliminating some of the execution work. So as agencies work, it's one thing to enjoy all the benefits of change that Google's putting out there, but it's automating a lot of what in the past we would have done. So it's getting to the point where it can manage your budgets for you pretty effectively. It can create ads for you pretty effectively. You give it a few inputs and it essentially can run a campaign for you pretty well. So it starts to undercut a lot of the value that agencies or traditional marketing roles bring. Just as it's maybe eliminating manufacturing positions and jobs like someone behind a cashier, it's going to be really interesting to see what this does to advertising. But where people are saying, yes, it may eliminate certain rules, that just means people now have more time to provide or invest their time into strategy, ideas, automation, machine learning. That's not going to do that, at least not yet anyway. So I think tweaking the knobs is still going to be there, but we get to do a lot more and scale more effectively. There's definitely been a lot of negative publicity. You probably heard a lot of about privacy breaches. Facebook got in a lot of trouble over data sharing, et cetera. There's a lot going into improving privacy for consumers. That does have a downside, though. When you're a consumer and you want ads that are relevant to you, you've got to enable, that's why you see those little cookie messages on the bottom. There's a trade-off there, keeping things free and relevant versus, safeguarding your privacy. And with the consolidation of just a handful of companies, they're gobbling up little startups here and there. There's a conversation around, okay, are these companies getting too big, and is everything flowing into Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple, and who else? So when you're working digital advertising, you're going to be working through those platforms. It's a little scary how much they can control. And then finally, ad blocking. It's a technology that's been around. It kind of comes and goes, but it makes it more difficult if you're an advertiser. If someone says, I'm not going to share any of my information, you're not going to be able to track where I'm going, well, I don't know if I'm effective in where I'm spending my money. That makes it a little harder. So there's this game that they're playing with how to get around that, but that can make it more challenging. Finally, this is the last slide here. I thought it would be helpful to share where you can go to get certified. Google just came out, I think it was a week ago, with what they call Skillshop. Essentially, if you go to this site or you do a search for certification training, you can get quite a few pages where you can read up on how to execute Google advertising campaigns, how to run Google Analytics, how to set up, for example, YouTube video campaigns. It's got pretty much anything and everything you can want in there. So there are video trainings, et cetera, and then they have exams where you can take them for free. And then if you do pass them, then you've got a certification. It'll essentially put something together for you that you can then put on your resume, you can put it on your LinkedIn profile, et cetera. It's verified, and so you can bring that to the table when you're having a conversation or looking for a position. Same thing with Microsoft. They've got it for paid search. Facebook has something now. They've had it for the last few years. It's gotten a lot better. Essentially, you're becoming certified to be a social media planner, campaign strategist, et cetera. And then these are a couple of training resources. So Lynda got purchased by LinkedIn, but they've got a ton of online courses, from anything as straightforward as just business practices to something very specific about digital advertising or running a channel. Highly recommended. And then General Assembly, similar there. And then these are a lot of the websites that I go to, or blogs or forums. They're really great. They give you a pulse of the industry, headlines of what's going on, news with big companies or major changes in the platforms, et cetera. And one in particular that I really like in the middle, Occam's Razor by Avinash Kaushik. He's essentially an ambassador for Google. Really smart person. His area of focus is in analytics, but usually every week he'll have a newsletter and he'll talk about how people or companies just kind of are mired in their ways and they don't think, and I think he calls them like data peaks. It's one thing if you're the person running 100 reports and you're really happy with that. It's like, why are you happy with that? What's the insight? What did you do to advance the thinking of the business? So it's really thoughtful and really smart. And then at the bottom there's a local organization, SEMPDX. They do events. They've got a big annual event. So it's great for networking, getting involved with the different events where they have speakers, et cetera, workshops. So a lot of ways that you can plug in there. But I think if you find yourself in these, you'll start to pick up on the language, the trends, and then you can bring a little bit more into those conversations, hopefully when you have an interview or when you're successfully hired. So that's all I've got. I hope that was helpful.
That was great.
All Thank you, Alex. That was awesome. Some of the things that I picked up that I want you guys to note just from a recruiter standpoint, and being in this world for, I don't know, 10-ish years. The one thing that I really picked up and something that I've used for the last 5 or 6 years was the STAR method. That I can't tell you is so impactful. I've been teaching that since it came around. And when I coach folks and I'm helping them find work and I've helped them do these things, there's a difference between somebody that has that method down versus just rambling. A lot of times when an interview happens, and I've interviewed thousands, and when they come in and you say, tell me about a time, and people hate these behavioral questions, but it really challenges the person that is listening in order to do that. Say, not just ramble, oh, I can, and then they'll go down a rabbit hole, and anyone that's been interviewing long enough knows this, knows, hey, this is what's happening. So the STAR method, if you don't know about it, I'd be glad to talk more in depth. There's a whole book on the STAR method. So there's lots of information about that. And so with that, I did forget an announcement. We are looking, I've been busy trying to, because we are looking at nonprofit, we're doing some different things, looking at expanding our reach into not only marketing and growing this group. We are going to be partnered with TAO. So if you're not unfamiliar with TAO, it's the Technology Association of Oregon. I've been meeting with them, and they're going to be throwing our events on their calendar. They love what we're doing here in Southwest Washington as well as Portland, but they're really expanding their reach. So it looks like we could be their main partner here in Vancouver, which is really cool. It's going to expand the companies, the businesses that they work with here, and put them in front of our membership here. So they love, what we're doing here in Southwest Washington, the events, and just kind of getting it out there. So working on partnerships behind the scenes to get that happen. Also, some of the sponsors just wanted to make sure that we get the sponsors out there. Gravitate here in town, fantastic company. They presented to us as well. And then Presso Coffee, again, they are one of our sponsors. So that said, we're going to hang out a little bit and network. Alex did send me the slide deck, so if you would like the slide deck, shoot me a message on LinkedIn and let me know, and I can pass that along to you. So thanks, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.